Today's video is at the request of some of my students who have asked me for some study tips for auditing. And these will be applicable whether you're an undergraduate student, whether you're a postgraduate student, or even if you're still studying for your professional qualification. I think these tips will go across all of those different levels. So let's start with my first tip. So tip number one is that auditing is always about understanding. So the key is to make sure that we have a good understanding of the content and not memorizing. So yes, we do have to have a good memory of to make sure that we understand the work, but understanding the content is not memorizing facts. So understanding means that we can know what the theory means, so I know what the theory means, I can explain how theory works, and then also I can apply, this is really important, my theory to practical situations. So this is not a subject that really uses much in the way of formulas. We have our audit risk model formula, but we don't really have too many formulas within our subject. So trying to memorize a formula doesn't really help in auditing. We need to know what the theory means, explain how it works, and then be able to apply the theory to practical situations. Because remember, every single audit is different. All right, so every audit is unique, which means in an exam situation, every question is going to be unique as well. So you need to know how to apply that theory and have a good understanding. My second tip, I'll do this in a different coloured pen so they're nice and clear, is to make sure that you can link the various audit topics together. And if you're already following my videos on YouTube, there are some videos on mind mapping, which is a way of trying to link our topics together. I find that students tend to learn topic, so they know each of the individual topics well, but they find it difficult to put topics together. So mind mapping and knowing how all of the various audit topics fit together is a really important component. My next one, I'll do this in the green pen again, is understanding your standards. All right, so here in Australia we're using our ASAs. If you're international, then you'll be using the international auditing standards, but it's really about understanding what the standards mean, because the standards are the auditor's instructions. And here in Australia, our auditing standards are legally enforceable, so it's important that we understand what they mean and then also know how that links back in to the various audit topics. So what does the audit standard instruct the auditor to do? So what are the auditor's responsibilities? And then also, importantly, how do they execute those responsibilities? So what do they do? And so that comes down to a couple of different things. That will be techniques, auditing techniques. There might be tools, and also applying knowledge of their auditing theory. So we've got understanding the content, linking the topics, knowing our auditing standards. Now, how much of an auditing standard do you need to know? If you have an open book exam, then I would certainly expect you to be able to look up paragraph references. And so often a lot of professional exams will be open book. If your exam is closed book, then I don't really expect my students to remember paragraph references. I just expect them to know the ASA numbers and then also have a basic understanding. Oh, that says understanding just there. Okay, so I've covered those three things. So in terms of what sort of knowledge you need to have, that's really important. Next, I'll move on to how we actually study and do those things. So let's move on to paper lined up. Number 4. And my 4th point is to make sure that you go back and you look at your homework questions. And if your academics are anything like me, then they choose homework questions for very specific reasons. So each homework question has a purpose. Alright, so we don't just choose questions at random or enough questions to fill up the term. We choose questions with purpose. So what you need to ask yourself is, what is this question trying to teach me? And if you can figure out what the question is trying to teach you, then that will give you an understanding of what sort of theory you need to know. And then the question is usually about how we apply it. So almost reverse engineer the question. Start with the question and say, what is my lecturer or my tutor trying to teach me by doing this question? We just don't do the questions because we like to inflict pain and suffering on students. Now, a common question I always get is, how do I practice? Here at UTS, in my subject, I don't give practice exams out. So I say to students, go back to the homework questions. You can also look in your textbooks, because remember, in your textbook there'll be questions that you didn't do for homework. So you could always look at other questions not examined in class. Alright, textbooks often have multiple choices in them. The textbook we use, the Leung, actually has the answers at the end of each chapter, so that's available. In terms of textbooks, most textbooks also have a significant amount of online content available. Alright, so those are quizzes, multiple choice, practice, true and false type questions. So make sure you look for a lot of online content. But the biggest or the best practice I can get students to do is make up their own questions. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to write an exam. One idea, and I'll give you an example here, is to test inherent risk. All right, so if we're looking at inherent risk, then I could make up my questions in a couple of different ways. I could pick a company from the newspaper. All right, give myself some time to do some research and list some inherent risks. I could swap companies with a friend. So you could set a friend a company, you do one yourself, swap your answers. Or you could brainstorm as part of a team. Alright, so really, in terms of practicing, you're only limited by your own imagination. When my students do work on controls, I often get them to go out and just sit, all right? Or as part of their daily lives, think about auditing. So on the bus, or the train, all right, or the tram, or the ferry, I ask students to see if they can identify internal controls. Can you see any weaknesses? How would I test the controls at any of these companies? Now, I've got public transport there, but we know that we exist in a world that has lots of businesses. So wherever I'm going, that could be the supermarket, I could be at the movies, I could be inside a store of some sort, clothing store, shoe store, jewelry, watches. I could even be at a nightclub, and I can think about internal controls and inherent risks. So really, the amount of practice that you are able to do is only limited by your own imagination. So think about integrating audit into your everyday life. Okay, let's think about my next tip here. Do this one in purple. Just move my little bit of paper up. All right, so my next tip, oh, the pen's not so great here, is to think before you write. So this is the sorts of tips I'm going to, actually I'll start this on a new page. So my next tip here, and these are really exam tips for when you're actually in the exam. So the first one is think before you write. And a lot of exams these days are being very strict with the amount of space that we give students. So if this is my exam paper, all right, I will often set students only certain limited amounts of space to write. And if you write anything outside of it, over here, you draw extra lines, it doesn't get marked. So the key is to think before you write. You need to be succinct, right? To the point. So how do you think before you write? Well, one of the keys is using your reading time. And using your reading time wisely. So that 10 minutes that you get before you can actually use your pen, use the reading time to think about the short answer questions, right? So usually exams are made up of multi-choice, and they're also made up of short answer or written questions. I don't ask essays, but it's also possible that you might get an essay at some universities. So with multi-choice and with my short answer questions, in the reading time, you have 4 answers or 5 answers here, but you don't have any answers or potential answers for your short answer questions. So in the reading time, focus your reading time on looking at these short answer questions, all right? Think in those 10 minutes, how am I going to answer part A, part B, part C? If there's a question, and I like to ask questions that don't have a yes or no answer. So sometimes I will have a question that is yes for 10 marks, and alternatively you could also answer no and still get 10 marks as well. So here you could be correct with either argument, therefore the answer or how you get your marks is going to depend on how well you explain or argue your point. All right? And that is why having a great understanding of the topics is really key. If you don't understand the topics, you can't explain or argue your point. So in the reading time, look at the short answer questions. Don't worry about the multiple choice. Often students tell me, oh, they answer the multi-choice, then later they go back and they change their mind. So it's better off thinking about these short answer questions. My next tip, think before you write, use your time wisely. My next one there is going to be answer the question. Now you might sort of think, well, that seems like a no-brainer, but often students will waste space by doing one of a couple of different things. Rambling, all right. The other one is giving a definition when it's not asked for. All right. So giving a definition, but if it doesn't help the question, don't do it. Rambling or giving me correct information but they don't answer the question. And this happens a lot. I might ask a question about fraud and students will give me information on assertions. So make sure that you're answering the question. Read the question really, really carefully. What is the question asking me to do? And don't rush. There's nothing wrong with thinking for a few minutes before you write so that your answer is succinct and the best that it can be. A lot of students will come to me later and say, oh, that is what I meant by my answer. You need to write what you mean in the exam. So answering the question is really, really key. My last tip down here is going to be time management. All right, so that means knowing how long is the exam and then how many marks, and then figuring out how long do I spend per question. All right, so that'll give us how much time per question. Because when I set an exam, my exam questions are usually made of a couple of different parts. So your typical exam question will have an easy component, it'll have a medium difficulty component, and it'll have a hard component. So what you want to do in an exam, if you set yourself 20 minutes and you only get to the medium component, you don't get to the hard, don't waste time once you've reached your time limit. Go on to question 2 and do the easy and medium parts of that question. Come back if you have time. So time management's really key. You never want to leave any questions blank. So blank responses are really missed opportunities. All right, so we want to make sure that we don't leave any questions blank unless they're those difficult parts of the question that we just can't get. Keep up with the time. That's really, really important. So those are all my tips. Good luck to my students. They have their exam this week. But these tips will apply no matter what sort of auditing that you're doing. Just to recap, we want to make sure that we know our content. Don't worry about memorizing. Understanding is key. Now, how to link the topics together. Make sure you watch the Amanda Loves to Audit videos on mind mapping. Understand your auditing standards. Go back through your homework questions and understand your homework. Practice, practice, practice. And make sure as well you get a good night's sleep before your exam. Your brain certainly needs a lot of rest to be able to operate efficiently. Best of luck, everybody.